Welcome to the Parish the Thought Show. The opinions of Brian, your host, and his guests have not been sanitized or scientifically tested, so please consume at your own risk. Now, here's Brian.
Ladies and gentlemen, and whoever else is listening, welcome back to the show. Today with me is my first and favorite child, Eden Strader, here to talk about her coming out story. And the reason I'm doing it a sort of for those who are chiming in and listening, a series for LDS parents of queer children. Whatever, should I use other titles to Eden? You correct me as I go.
Queer children is great.
Queer children, because I've seen a lot of reactions from parents that are just crushing, and stories I've heard of parents who have been conditioned their whole lives around the culture of the LDS faith and how that's harmful to kids. Yeah, I'm sure there's some that do it right and are just perfect at it. But my guess is there's a lot that don't. And that's why we're here, for you to tell your story and how your mom and I didn't do a lot of things right in the beginning when you first told us, and how, we've overcome a lot of barriers and built a lot of bridges since then. And I think we're in a pretty good place now, but it wasn't always so. Take it away. Tell me how.
Yeah. Where do you want me to start?
Let's start with when you told us, when you came out to us, maybe even go back. We could touch about you growing up in the church and getting married in the temple, and you could touch on that if you wanted to as well, but don't have to. But it's your story. I want you to tell us how that went, what you felt based on our reactions, and I'll talk about how we reacted and how that may or may not have been the best path.
Yeah. I think one of the things that I'll start with is like the beginning of just like knowing I was queer when I was younger, but not having the verbiage to describe it. And I think that's a really common sentiment with a lot of people in my generation and older. It's a little bit less so now, just since there's so much education and representation. But like I remember as a kid asking you and mom if it was normal to think about kissing girls, to which the answer was always yes, it's just the devil. And I think growing up in the church, it was really easy to believe that, just because we're told and we're taught that, the devil tempts us and homosexuality is a sin. And so it was really easy to conflate those thoughts with, Satan, quote unquote. And because there was so little representation, like back in when I was a kid, it was basically just Ellen. And I don't look like Ellen. I don't talk like Ellen. I don't resonate with Ellen at all. It didn't really like make sense for me to be gay. It just felt like there were thoughts from some, quote unquote evil higher power that was putting those thoughts in my head. And I think that is a really common sentiment with people in the church. I won't say like across the board, just because everyone's experience is so different, but I think it's really easy to convince yourself it's of the devil when that's all you've been told your entire life. And I also think that leads to people stifling it. It tends to like lead to people pushing it down. And I think too, that plays a really large portion in how people react when people come out. It feels like you're acting on something devilish. And for a lot of people, coming out is a long process. It's a really intentional one. And I think that's something I prompt people to keep in mind when their kids are coming out or people in their lives are coming out, is no one's doing that on a whim. Like that's a well thought out process and experience. And I haven't met anyone that's ever excited to come out. Like no one's looking forward to it. It's always, I won't say always because that's a generalization, but like it's most often something that people kind of dread, is this like opportunity to feel more themselves and to finally live a truth that's been stifled for so long, but at the cost of some unknown factor. Like you never know exactly how it's going to go, and you don't know if it's going to cost you your family or your friends or your job or whatever it may be. So I think like that was a long tangent just to say I think that's kind of how it started.
I used to think that being gay was a total choice when I was growing up. And even probably 10 years ago, maybe even long, about 10 years ago, probably, I think I just thought it was a choice. Since you have come out, of course, I have done research and interviewed people and read books to understand this not new to you, but new to me world. And the common theme is it's always been there. And so my thinking was, why would someone willingly, like you said, they don't just do it on a whim. Why would somebody willingly choose a, quote unquote lifestyle, as some people call it, that society or their families or their church will ostracize them for? Why would somebody willingly do that just for shits and giggles? Which
They
told me,
wouldn't.
exactly, and which told me, no, I was wrong. And I'll probably go to the grave thinking that I was, knowing that I was wrong on that perspective. I didn't know any different. And I've also spent 30 years of my life almost inside the LDS church and the culture and the teachings and all the things that, call it whatever you want, that are in my head. So tell us, when you came out, what was your thought process when you told us? I think you told us through an email at first.
Told you it over text, yeah, in a group chat.
About 3 years ago, right? Roughly.
Yeah, about 3 years ago.
And you said you came out as bi.
Mm-hmm.
And then you switched it up and said, "No, I'm full on," or something shortly after, right?
Yeah, and like we can get into that too because I think that's something I'm like very passionate in talking about. Um, I think when I came out, I had an inkling that it wouldn't go well. I had a feeling that it wasn't going to be received in the way that I wanted, and I think at least from my experience when I was prepping to come out, realizing that I was queer was really difficult just because I had grown up religious. I still had that like wiring in my brain of like, this is a sin, this is a sin. And so it was really hard for me to come to terms with. It also just changed my whole perspective to be like, oh my gosh, I don't know if my life is going to look the way that I always thought it did. And that's really scary. And so I think that's like an important thing to note as well, as like when your child's in the process of coming out, they've probably already really processed or at least are dealing with or still processing a certain level of guilt and dread and uneasiness and mourning for maybe the life that they thought they were going to have, maybe the life that they thought they could pretend to have, maybe the life that they thought they could talk themselves into having. And so I knew after processing and like still actively processing like that guilt and that shame, I knew it was going to be really hard and really emotional for it to not be taken well. Like I just remember being like, it's going to hurt my feelings so much when this doesn't go well. And so my thought behind the text message was like, this is a way that I can communicate without having to almost like giving you guys your time and space to process before I had to process your response. Like giving you a minute and not having to see your faces, not having to have you immediately answer. Like to me, I was like, let me give them the space to have their reaction. And then hopefully by the time they get back to me, it's at least in a little bit better of a place than it would have been immediately. Like I can give them, you know, give them and myself this opportunity to process and grieve without making me feel even worse than I already do and already knowing that it's not going to go very well.
What was your fear that the reaction would be?
I think the fear is always that you're gonna lose your people, that's gonna be the deal breaker of love between you and your family or your friends or your community, is that like this is going to irreparably change the way that they see you. And, that can go as badly as cutting you off, like completely cutting you off. And for me, I've always been so close to you and mom that I was like, this could, irrevocably ruin our relationship. So the stakes felt, especially after I think too, leaving the church and knowing how well that didn't go over, it was like, oh my gosh, like I have to now deliver another
Another
blow.
blow. Yeah.
Like, which is that I'm like, and in my case too, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm divorced. I've left the church. Now I'm realizing I'm gay. Like, how many LDS
Maybe
nightmares
not
can I take?
realizing you already knew. You're just
Yeah,
coming
but
to
like
terms
coming
with
to
it.
terms
Yeah.
with being
Yeah.
gay. Yeah. Like it was very much a feeling of like, oh my gosh, like how many blows can I deliver when leaving the church already went over horribly? Like there's no way this is going to go over well. Like how many blows can I give before they cut me off, essentially?
And we had a strained relationship for a while over a lot of things. This was maybe just one of them.
Yeah.
I think we probably had a more restrained relationship over political type stuff and church stuff, if I remember correctly. I don't remember all
I'm
the
trying to
details.
think. I feel like the church one probably lasted the longest just because I also didn't leave the church very quickly. That was like a really long, almost 3-year process for me. Like it almost started when I got married and went through the temple and like ended when I got divorced and finally left the church. So I think that one lasted longer. I think this one was the most extreme one in the sense that like I don't think there had ever been a time in my life where I talked to you guys so little, like where there was so little relationship. And I also think like me leaving the church wasn't a total surprise by the time I left it, just because like everyone knew I really struggled with the temple, and then I was really struggling with my testimony, and then I didn't believe anymore and I stopped wearing my garments. Like there was a lot of stepping stones for that one, whereas this was like, oh, by the way, I'm queer. And so it was like a really harsh like cutoff with our relationship that lasted what, like a year and a half.
Something like that. It was a long time. Long
Mm-hmm.
time for sure. I think you were the one that you kind of controlled that distance for your own
Yeah.
sanity, probably, and your own health. I
Mm-hmm.
hated it. I know mom hated it. The distance that was there, but it was time you needed to. And I always tell people, there's another young man that I've had on the show a couple times who he's 34 and just recently came out to his parents probably about a year ago, and he's frustrated that they can't realize that it's 2024 and people are gay. Just get it,
Mm-hmm.
get over it. And I told him, you've been processing this your whole life, and you just dumped this on, not dumped, dumped this bad word, but you've just delivered this news to your parents. When they say they need some time, they probably do. It's probably real as much as it's frustrating. They're having to sort of mourn, like you even said, you didn't use the word mourn, but a life you thought you would have that now no longer is there. So
Yeah.
you had to adjust to that, what that would look like. Same with a parent. Parent has to, when we raise our kids in certain rules and paths and ways, and so you have this vision of what their life will be like, and then it's not. So there's a mourning there that has to happen. That just for other, parents who may be listening, that it's normal if your thought process is one way your whole entire life, and then someone says, "Oh, by the way, not so much anymore."
Yeah. I think the feelings that come up and the reactions that happen in that process really comes down into the way that it's handled. I think no one expects in this day and age too, right? Because like I think what's important is like, yeah, it's 2024, people are gay. And I do think that people need to, in a sense, get over it. But at the same time, we are kind of on the cusp of this being normal. This is a very recent thing. And like, you know,
What's a recent thing?
gay marriage wasn't even legalized until I was like a senior in high school. Like being openly queer hasn't been normal for so long that I don't think anyone comes out and doesn't expect, let's just say parents, for example, to have no reaction whatsoever. I think like the first generation to probably have that in their parenting style will probably be Gen Z because they've lived with queer people their entire lives.
All right, for my old people that are listening, I don't know the generations and the ages. So what is Z? What years
Gen
are
Z is
Z?
the generation after me. So it's like
It's like
19, I
the
think it's
last
like
generation.
1997 to like 2000 something.
Because
So
there's
it's the kids younger than me. It's like Alyssa, Emily. I think Matthew might be the next generation. I'm not positive though. But like they've kind of grown up with queer people being really normal. Like I remember Chloe and Ryder, my other siblings, for those that are listening and like don't know that I have other siblings. I have other siblings.
do we need to do the genealogy for those?
Yeah, I've got the crazy family tree, but I have other siblings who are at this point now they're 18 and 20. And when I came out to them, they just like didn't even blink. Like they were just like, okay, like why are you even saying this? Like who cares? Like it's literally a non-issue. Like it's so casual to that generation. And all of this is to say I don't think that when people come out to people of older generations, they don't expect you to have no reaction. They don't expect you to have no feelings about it. It's just the way that you handle those reactions and the way that you express them is going to be make or break on if you keep up a relationship with the person coming out. And I think that's I think it's similar to like when people leave the church and people like to think that they leave it because they want to sin and they want to have fun and they want to party and they want to like blah 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 whatever it is. And that's so not the case. I've never met a single person that left the church because they want to party. Every single person I've met that's left the church has been heartbroken, including myself, that it wasn't true. Like it is life altering to realize something that you based your entire life around isn't true. And it's the same with coming out. Like it's the same type of thing. It's just like no one's doing it for fun. No one's doing it to piss you off. No one's doing it to punish you. It is something that they've had a really, really hard time likely coming to terms with. And if you can lead with that empathy when receiving the news alongside having your own reactions, that's what's going to determine how the relationship moves forward.
There's this fear that somehow I think it's a fear that you will, the child will be different. And what I've realized through your story, you're the same wise ass person you were before. You have a few more tattoos. That's about the only difference. But you're the same person. I think there's a fear. I may be bouncing all over the place on this, but in the gospel, I think the baseline should be love your neighbor. And our kids are our neighbors. Jesus didn't say save them or fix them or put them on your personal service project list. He said love them. If we would just do that and allow them, we preach agency all the time in our culture. Allow them to use their agency and just know that all you can do is love them. There's nothing else you can do to fix or save, or I'll put your name on the temple prayer roll. I always tell people to put my name in all caps so God really knows it's
serious.
It's serious, yet all caps. And inside the LDS culture, this eternal family concept scares a lot of parents. They think, oh,
Yeah.
well, Eden's now gay. She's cut off in the afterlife, which makes no sense to me. If God is this loving God that is our father, why would he do that? That makes zero sense. They're like, oh, you have
Oh,
to go to this special other place and we'll come visit you, but you can't come see us, kind of thing. That's a lot of what's taught through the culture, whether it's doctrinal or not, I don't know, but it's definitely in the culture.
yeah. No, I agree. I think like I also think like in terms of kids coming out to LDS parents, the likelihood that the queer child hasn't already thought about that and processed that is pretty minimal. Like I know that was a thought that I had already processed of like, oh my gosh, my family is going to think that I've broken up the family forever. And I think like when you're processing your child coming out, the more privately you can do that, the better. I think that's where we went wrong. I think that's where a lot of like pain happened in our family is that things were processed, like thoughts were processed out loud. They're processed in front of siblings. They were said behind my back, and it all got back to me. And it's so painful to have things that you've already worried about just like dug even deeper. It's like salt in the wound. And I think like if you can realize like okay, every thought that I'm having right now about my queer child coming out, they've probably already predicted I'm going to have. Like they've probably already processed this. Like they've already had to do the pain of thinking through that I'm going to think this. So like how can I think this, process this, sort this without making them live it twice, essentially? Because I know for me, I had so many thoughts on what could go wrong when coming out, and a lot of them did happen. And realizing that they were happening just made it that more painful because I was having to just hear it. Like I was just having to hear it behind my back. And I think too, that's like another thing is like, it's horrible to say it to your child's face, but like also realize that it's horrible to not say it to their face and have it get back to them. So, as much as you can process that with your spouse or with a therapist or basically just that, like like process it privately. And like, I think that's been almost my method of action too with being queer is like I process a lot of my queerness by myself unless I feel like it's something that like you guys need to hear just because I know it could make you uncomfortable. And I think like if you can think of that from your child's perspective too and be like, what can I process in private or what can I process in a way that won't get back to my child so that I don't have to cause them more pain than possible. And I think that's one of the things I think what's hard is like the shock value of your child coming out often overpowers the fact that like what can be top of mind for you while your child is coming out is just being like, this is my child and understanding that they are in so much pain, knowing that you're having a reaction to it. And anything you can do just out of love for your child to minimize that pain, the better. Because I think sometimes it's really easy to just be like, well, I need to process this. I'm having a hard time with it. And it's like they're having a hard time with it too. And it's your child. So, like, as much as you can do to minimize that pain, the better for your relationship.
Okay, so speaking of reliving it and salt in the wound, what were some of the things that we said to you or that you remember? I don't remember exactly all that was said. I'm sure it was hurtful. The stuff that was behind your back. Do you want to talk about what those look like and what? Because I have a feeling that many other LDS parents say the same things. If you want to go down that road, do you remember some of the things that were said that caused you harm and hurt that we did? And I know you had a spy on the inside, your other sister, who recorded things, fair point. And that was
Yeah, I think
harmful. That was
like,
hurtful. So can
yeah.
you share those? Or would
Yeah,
you?
I think like, yeah, there was, I know like the first thing that kicked off kind of the pause in the relationship was someone saying that if like one of their kids ever brought home a partner of the same sex, they would get kicked out. And that was I think like as close to like my worst nightmare as possible, because it was that fear of like getting cut off. And so to be having my parents say like, yeah, if you do it, you're gonna get kicked out, it was just like, okay, so I had every reason to be as scared and sad as I am. Like, it's true, my worst nightmare is true. um there was lots of talk about it being an abomination, like just the typical things that get said in the church about queer people. And to have something that, like we've talked about, like is not a choice, it's just a core part of who you are, it comes as naturally as you loving the opposite sex, something that's so natural that you have no control over, being something about you that's abominable and just disgusting and just horrific. It's like hard to put into words how that makes you feel. And I think what's also hard is like growing up in the church is I'd already heard those things my entire life. So like coming to terms with being queer, I was already having those thoughts in my head and having to like rewire that and like process like, okay, this isn't actually true about me, like this is natural, this is okay, this is good. And to like do all that hard work and be like so sad that those things were said all my life, and then to have them said again by the people I love and trust most, was just heartbreaking. And I think sometimes it can feel, I feel like parents of queer kids can often feel like it's such a attack on them, or it's so personal to them. It's like their thing to mourn. And while it's okay to mourn and like have those feelings, like I want to make that clear, like this is your child's thing. And everything that you say to them that's to the negative, or that is painful or hurtful, or is telling them that they're gross or dirty or wrong or disgusting, is just like snipping at a cord of your relationship. Like it's just another thread just hacked away. And I think, I got very lucky with you guys that you were willing to do the work to repair that cord and repair that relationship. But I don't think had you not done that, we would have ever had a relationship like we did again, just because it was so painful and so raw. And to think of your parents as thinking of you as disgusting is just like the most hurtful thing in the world.
It minimizes and you feel less than.
Yeah.
I know it's just words, but the way I can try to get my head around, because people call it, it's perverse and dirty and gross, and you're a pervert if you do that, and which is awful to say to somebody. That would be like, okay, I'm a 55-year-old man. If there's a 20-year-old woman nearby in leggings, I'm probably going to be attracted to that just by nature. That would be like someone telling me, don't even look at her, you're a pervert and gross. That I can know what that would feel like to me. So that's probably the similar thing to you.
It's just like,
Ish, right?
yeah, it's such a like, but I think too, like, we could go down the nuances of like age gap versus sexuality.
Well, I mean,
and like,
I just use that as a random, it could be
yeah, yeah,
it could be the hot Mormon moms, whatever you want to call it.
yeah.
Same
I think
thing,
like,
telling me that don't be attracted to that. Which is a natural thing for me.
yeah, I think it's just like it literally is, and I know it's so hard to wrap your head around for most people, but it's like it's as natural to queer people to be attracted to the same sex as it is for you to be attracted to the opposite. It literally feels the exact same. In fact, it feels, well, I was gonna say it feels more natural than them pretending to like the opposite sex, but I'm in comparisons. Like you being attracted to the opposite sex is the same feeling as them being attracted to the same sex or however they identify. And like to come to terms with your sexuality is to accept that, like, if you want to change it, you can't. Like, and I'm at the point now where like I wouldn't change my sexuality. I love it. Like, I love being queer. I love this part of my life. I love the community I've found within it. But like there were times where I wanted to change it and I just had to come to terms with the fact that I couldn't. And so to have something that you literally can't change about yourself and people are just criticizing it and demoralizing you over it is just like it's truly just like hacking away at a relationship over something that cannot be changed. And I think that's what people need to weigh out when their children are coming out is just this like come to terms with the fact that it's not changing. Like it is the reality of the situation. And is it worth the relationship with your child? Like that's ultimately the game that you might be playing.
This young man that I had on a couple times, his situation, he's had a strained relationship with his family for 15, 16 years. He tried to go on a mission. He came home early, he tried to do all the things, check all the boxes. And since he was, for lack of a better term, struggling with his identity this whole time, being raised in a very conservative LDS family, and they kept asking, "What's wrong with you? Why are you broken?" And when he finally came out, he said, "This is the reason I've distanced myself from you for so long, because I never felt like I was ever going to be enough." And things that were said, and even, and this one just broke my heart. And I've heard this countless times on people I've interviewed and books I've read. His family, brother-in-law, said, "Well, do I need to protect my children from you now?" Automatically just assuming because someone's gay that they just want to sleep with everything that moves, which is not the case at all. There was some friends years ago, they assume that every gay man is going to be instantly attracted to them.
Yeah.
And I said, "Well, you're not even an attract. You're fat and ugly. Why would a gay man be attracted to you? You just think because he's gay that he wants you," which is an arrogant position to hold.
No, it's definitely, I think there's so many like old school stereotypes about being queer that like thankfully have been shaken off quite a bit, I think, in the last couple years. But like to think of it as this like gross, perverse thing is so offensive. And again, I think just puts into the like the questioning of character where it's like you think because I'm gay, I'm an entirely different person when in reality it's just there's a new label for the person that I've already existed as. Like that's truly the only thing that's changed is that like I might be more myself or I might feel more free in my own skin. Um, I might date differently than you've seen me in the past, but it doesn't change who you are at all. In fact, if anything, it just betters who you are because you finally feel like you're not keeping this giant secret. And so to put into question everything about a person and their character just because they've come out is so offensive. Like so offensive. And I think that's like another thing for people to realize is like this is the same person that you thought they were 10 seconds before they told you. It's the same exact person. They're just deciding to share a truth with you that will make them more themselves.
Okay, I've had this thought for years, and I don't know if I've ever told you this. And since it's Pride Month, the world seems to be in a kerfuffle about it again. I used to say, and you can tell me if I'm wrong or right on this, why does who you choose to sleep with matter so much? Because your character is what defines who you are, not your sexuality. So am I missing the boat? Or am I missing this in saying that? Because you're like, why is it always got to be about their sexuality constantly? It's their character that matters, how they treat people.
I think also
you may have said it to me at one point. So correct me if I'm wrong on this as well. Is that because you've hid it so long that it almost becomes a dominant part of your personality. So
yeah, I think
steer me correctly on this.
Yeah, I think one, it's important to note that sexuality isn't just who you sleep with. it's like, I think that would be the same as me being like, yours and mom's relationship is just sleeping together. Like, that's it. Like, that's all it is. When that's not reality, you have a love and a bond much deeper than just sex. And I think that's one of the things, like, sex is a part of it. Um, and like, that's fine. But I think it's not redundant. What's the word where you're like really chopping something down to its base foundation? I can't think of the word. I think it minimizes what
Distilling.
sexuality is. Yeah, I think it minimizes what sexuality is by just saying it's just sex, because it's so much more than that. It's like who you love, who you have bonds with, who you connect with in a way so much greater than sex. And like, sex can be a part of it, but like, it's not just sex. So I think that's like really important to know. And I think another thing that's important to know is like, who you want to celebrate your relationships and your love. Like, think of engagement parties, think of weddings. Like, those are all celebrations of love. And so to finally live in a world or a space where you can love who you love publicly feels like an even greater celebration, because not only are you celebrating the love that you have for other people, but you're celebrating the fact that you even can, like, that you're even provided the opportunity to. You're celebrating all the queer people that have come before us that have fought and died for our rights. You're celebrating the people that have died for our causes. Like, there is so much more to being queer than just sex. And there's a long and rich history that does not get talked about enough. And I think like that's something that's really important to know, is that like when we're celebrating pride, we're celebrating so much more than just having sex with people. Like, that's almost offensive. Like, it's so much more than that. It's the love and relationships that you're allowed to have, and the fact that we're now allowed to have them, and that there has been a long and still goes like continuous fight in order for us to have that right. And that's really what like pride is, and celebrating pride is. And I also think like when it comes to, I think it's like a good thing to bring up, like the commentary of queer people, like quote unquote shoving it in my face. And that happens a lot when queer people are just existing. Like, they're just holding hands with their partner in the park, or kissing their partner in the park, or, having a relationship in public. You never would think of a hetero couple as like shoving it down your throat
You
by
think the
being.
media? You think the media is to blame for that?
I do think so. I think also like, I think the media is to blame for it, but I also just think it's like natural, like people's natural bigotry towards heterosexual or homosexual people is that, and like queer people is that they are so sickened by it and so convinced that it's perverse that any display of it is like disgusting to them.
Well,
And I think it's,
I've said in the past when I was ignorant, well, maybe still am. I don't care what they do behind closed doors. I just don't want to see it. I've said that before
yeah.
in my ignorance and been okay with it.
Yeah. And I think like, ask yourself in those moments, would I be upset if a heterosexual couple did it? Like, would I be mad? Like, would I be mad if I saw a heterosexual couple kissing in the park, holding hands in the park, walking around with their partner and their
Wouldn't even be on
families?
my radar.
Wouldn't even be on your radar at all. And so I think it's important when you have this dialogue of like, don't shove it down my throat, is you like actually ask yourself, like, is this actually being shoved down my throat? Or is this a queer person just existing and like living their life? And I know I've been very lucky that I live in a city that is like very open to queer people. It's very safe for queer people. I don't think there's anywhere in the world that's perfectly safe for queer people, but like I live in one of the best cities for it. I live in New York. And even still, like I have been in situations where like I couldn't hold my girlfriend's hand in public because we were getting harassed so much, and like even sexualized so much, or harassed and like looked at disgustingly and like hollered at, and like we were just existing. No one's looking twice at a heterosexual couple holding hands walking down the street. They're just existing there. And it's I think it's important to remember and ask yourself, like, am I blowing this out of proportion because it's something I'm uncomfortable with? And is this an opportunity to become more comfortable with something that's not bad? It's just existing.
There was a time, when we were living in Southern California and we left Southern California. I have to share this funny story, right? About why we left. One of the reasons we left.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk about it or you want me to talk about it?
I'm happy to talk about it. We moved because in the grade above me, girls were having quote unquote lesbian parties. They were kissing each other.
At 12, you were 10,
And
11, 12 years old.
yeah. And I just think it's hilarious that you moved us out of a state so I didn't become gay and I just was gay anyway. We probably just could have figured it out sooner, honestly.
We had to stay there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that is funny. But I remember when we lived there, it was before Prop 8. I know Prop 8 got all the press, most of the press, but when we lived there was Prop 22 was on the ballot when we lived in California. You were 5 years old, maybe. And I was convinced that them gays were going to ruin the family. I'd
Mm-hmm.
heard that crap. I'd heard that rhetoric inside the church and the media. Gays are going to ruin the family. Well, just by sheer numbers, it'll never happen because there's the percentage of people that are gay versus percentage of people that are heterosexual. The math it'll never happen. They're not going to ruin marriage.
Yeah.
And I used to think that. I used to think, oh, they're going to ruin it. I'm like, are they? Are they really going to ruin it? If there was an older gay gentleman that lived next to us, and I had my Prop 22 sign in the yard, and he comes out and just shakes his head, and oh, Brian, and I was just like, I'm standing strong for what I believe. I'm sure that hurt him a lot,
Mm-hmm.
but that was the ignorance that I had at the time. And guess what? Heterosexual couples are still getting married. Families are still growing like crazy.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know what the stats are, but they're still
It's still happening. People are still
happening,
straight.
still straight, still having babies. And I see these
Mm-hmm.
comments like, thank a straight person if you're here today. Okay. Yeah, the math, I get it, but that's not helpful to say something like that because I see all these
No.
people posting things against Pride Month. And speaking of Pride Month, I've only actually been to one in Salt Lake, and it was because I was an EMT at the time and I was working the parade as a medic. And there are, the flamboyant, for lack of a better term, floats and people running. Do you think those are helpful to the quote unquote cause?
Yeah, I think so. I think like one of the reasons why I'm so intentional and attempt to be so outspoken and active in the community is like I think every time a queer kid gets to see a queer person existing is a positive thing. And so I think having more visible and happy queer people, like the more we see that, the better. Because, I'm sure you've seen, or maybe you haven't seen, so I'll say it, but there's like a graphic that usually goes around this time of year. And it's like pride is important because there's a queer kid out there that thinks they're better off dead than gay.
Yeah, I have seen it
And
multiple
like,
times, and that's horrific.
it's horrific. And like, I'm really lucky that I didn't realize I was gay until I was old enough. Like I didn't process that I was gay until I was old enough to have like the skills to manage that. But I can't imagine what it would have been like to have realized that as a child and to have thought that I was better off dead because that's how it's spoken about. And especially back in the day, like it was just the worst thing that you could be was gay. The worst thing that you could be was gay. And I think I think when that feeling comes up of like, I don't want this shoved in my throat, a good, like when it comes to pride, especially too, like thinking of it as like, okay, but what if this saves a child's life? This could literally save a child's life to see happy queer people existing. And that is such a powerful, powerful thing that if you want to tear down, I'd like suggest doing deep introspection on because that truly is why Pride is so important, is to celebrate the people that have died for this cause and to make sure that no, as little people die for it as possible moving forward.
What, and you probably already touched on this, but some counsel for, well, and again, we touched on it, but counsel for parents who, because I don't know, this is nothing new. Being gay is nothing new. It's been around forever, so far as I understand.
Mm-hmm.
I've had this perspective that we're seeing more people more open about it than we ever have. In fact, my tagline on my show is, ladies and gentlemen, and whoever else is listening, I thought somebody might take offense to that, but I've been doing that for 6 years. I thought somebody in the trans community might take offense to that I have that tagline as my show, intro to my show, is ladies and gentlemen, and you other people, kind of thing. I don't know where I was going with this thought. Rein me back in, Eden.
You were going the direction of, I think, like things to say to parents, maybe when their child's coming out, question mark.
Yeah. I think a lot of the reaction that we had, Mom and I had, yeah, this is, I want to kind of smack on the culture a little bit. And did anyone directly say this to us? Maybe not, but it's something we learned. Is, oh, I know Mom had a much harder struggle than I did, and I think it's a lot of LDS moms feel responsible for how their kids turn out. In fact, here's an example of when you and Alyssa left the church. Mom took all that on her as she has failed. I'm a failed mom. If I would have only done more prayers, more scripture study, more this, more checking of the boxes, then my kids wouldn't have chosen these paths. And when your other sister Emily was on her mission, I asked her, I said, okay, so you're taking all the negative credit for Eden and Alyssa leaving the church. Are you going to claim credit for Emily being on her mission? And she had a hard time with that. She couldn't do that. I said, you can't have it both ways. You have to, either you're going to own it, like I'm responsible for how all my kids turned out, or you're not. And that's like, oh, what will the neighbors think? I think there's a lot of that processing of, oh, I'll be talked about by the other moms, or I didn't do enough and I should have done this more. And which we do. We go down these dark holes instead of realizing that we have taught our kids agency from the time they're 8 years old when they get baptized, but choose the right when a choice is placed before you. The songs and all the whatever part of the rituals and part of the culture. Yet when they exercise it and choose things we don't like, then we don't like that plan. Well, I want Satan's plan. Just do what I say. And everyone wins. Everyone makes it to the end, whatever the end is, whatever it looks like. So I would say, are all LDS parents like this? I don't know. I've talked to a few that, in fact, this young man who came out last year to his family, his dad had said at one point, if any of my sons ever come out gay, I'll disown them, which I don't even know what that looks like. I'll disown them. I don't know. I can't imagine doing that. I mean, and we inadvertently did that to you. We weren't trying to, but we did that to you. I can't imagine willingly saying, Eden, you're done. You're out. Don't call us. You're out of the club. You're out of the, we're photoshopping you out of the family pictures. That kind of mentality is horrible. I can't imagine doing that to my kid. But I think it happens for fear of what that might look like to the other members of the congregation.
Yeah.
And again, if someone's out there and I'm getting this all wrong and I'm smoking crack, please chime in and tell me. I'm open to having my mind changed in any direction.
Yeah, I don't actually know if I have other thoughts. I think it's really easy to take it as like a personal reflection of you or something that other people are going to judge you for. And I think this is where, I studied the Bible and I was in the church for like 24 years, so I know it pretty well. But like there are plenty of scriptures about not judging other people and how judging other people is a sin. And so like if your neighbors are judging you for your child making decisions, that's on them. That's not on you. And like that ultimately has no effect on you. And to, I think, your children coming out and you being okay with it is something that is going to greatly benefit them and add happiness to their lives. And isn't that ultimately what you want for your child, is for them to experience happiness? And I think that it takes a lot of unpacking to get to that point. But if you love your child, it's work worth doing, I would like to think.
Of course, absolutely. I don't know how this directly relates to what you just said. However, I remember when you were dating one of your exes, who shall not be named, you had announced to us, it was shortly after you came for your sister's missionary homecoming, and you brought your partner with you. And then I think, yeah, you told me when I was taking you both to the airport in Vegas, I believe, that you were moving in together. Or maybe you told me after you got home. I don't remember.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
And I think my reaction was, and what you want balloons or something? I like, okay. I just assumed it was the natural course of action, but was that a bad reaction?
No, I think
I think I caught myself as well. I was thinking, oh, I should have been. That's great. Happy for you, but I was just like, so.
Yeah, I didn't think it was a bad reaction because I also think too, like, just as I expect you to provide leniency on certain aspects of my life, like for example, even with hetero couples, the church doesn't like you moving in together beforehand. That's not a thing that you do in church culture. So I never expected you to have a good reaction to that, and that, or like have like a, oh my gosh, yay, like that's so exciting reaction, just because that's against the teachings of the church
Living in
regardless.
sin.
Yeah. And so I think there was like, I don't think it was a bad reaction. I was going to say, I don't think, just as I know that I am not a perfect person, I also didn't ever expect you and mom to be perfect people with your reactions. And I think that's important too, is like your child probably doesn't expect you to have a perfect reaction to things all the time. And like, is there even such a thing as perfect reactions? I don't know. I think that's opinion based. And so there's so much nuance to it. And so I think it's important to like almost relieve that pressure. Like I know after mom did a lot of work to get to a good point and to build our relationship back up again, I could tell that she would try to have like the perfect reaction to things. Like she almost felt like she had to be like overly excited about things or overly
Overcompensate.
inclusive. Yeah. And it was like, I didn't expect that in any capacity. And like, I think it's important to like give yourself space to be a human being in regards to your child's coming out and transition and whatever that may be. Because they also expect you to be a human about it. Like I didn't expect my parents to have a perfect reaction. And so like allow yourself the grace to like be a human. I think what was important was like having that communication with mom, if we're using this example specifically, of like, hey, it's okay for you to say things sometimes that are like I remember someone checked out Alyssa at Disneyland. And I was like, oh, what a guy. And mom was like, or girl.
Yeah.
And it cracked me up because I was like, oh, it's mom. It's like, okay, like not everything has to be said as gay and straight. Like it can just be that we said something about a hetero person and that's okay. So like relieve that pressure on yourself as well. Like I don't think your child expects quote unquote perfect reactions. Like it didn't faze me that you didn't have this abhorrently positive reaction to us moving in together, because it was like you wouldn't have been excited even if I was moving in with a man. You would have just been like, eh,
do it, whatever.
yeah,
Your
fine.
life. You do what you
Yeah.
want to do. You're a grown woman. Do it.
Mm-hmm.
What else haven't I talked about that you think would be helpful for people?
I think like what's important, I've said that so many times, but like one thing that's important to note is that like I am so much happier and more fulfilled and more loving as a person in general since coming out. And I don't know anyone else who has had an opposite experience. Everyone I know that's come out, unless they're bad people, because bad gay people exist, just like bad straight people exist. But like as a general rule, people who come out get to live more honest and truthful and loving lives. And I think that's something that you can keep reminding yourself when times are tough when your child is coming out is like, this is going to lead to my child being happier and more fulfilled and more supported and more loving. And if you can just keep that in the back of your mind as you try to work through these hard feelings, it will be so helpful because I think a lot of people like to focus, and this is like a big discussion in the queer community on like how there's almost a fetishization, word is really hard for me to get out, of queer pain, where we love to talk about how hard it is to be queer and like how tough it is and the bad things that happen to queer people. And we don't necessarily need to do that. Like, I think that's why it's visibility is so important. Pride is so important, is because it's like, no, queer people exist and they're very happy and they're very successful and they lead really beautiful lives. And like, isn't that something that you would want for your child in the end? Is to live this like very beautiful and truthful life.
There in a neighboring ward congregation, for those that don't know about the Mormons, there was a family that I was assigned, as we do, assigned to minister or home teach. They had a young son who he was probably 13, maybe 14 at the time. And good kid, really quiet. And his mom just posted this really long post about it was a picture of him and his partner. And it was really nice to see, because I got to share some of our story and how we navigated that whole path. So it was really fun to see her, good kid, still the same good kid. But it was nice to see there's probably more than we realize that are hiding. And I think I had this thought earlier, but it never came out. But I have this thought that we're seeing more people coming out to give the rest of us straighties, I just made that word up, these straighties, opportunities to love people that are different. More opportunities to love in ways we didn't know we could. That's my theory on why we're seeing this wave of people coming out.
Yeah,
Again.
I think it's also like there's a wave of people coming out because it's finally safe to do so.
Yeah.
Like, quote unquote, like, there's still places and situations that are not safe to come out in, but for the most part, we are working towards a safer, better world. And so like, that's why there is such a huge influx of queer people. Like they've always been there. They've just been in the closet. It's not a fad. It's not a trend. Again, why would someone choose it? When it's probably going to make their life significantly harder, at least for a while. And I think that's something to remind yourself is like, it isn't a fad. It isn't, gay people aren't going to make your child gay. There's no conversion for it. It's just that we finally are living in a society and world that is working towards being more safe for queer people to exist out loud. And so more people feel comfortable coming forward.
And it's nothing to be afraid of. Yeah, like yes, they're not coming for your kids and the media is going to grab a hold of, they're going to see the two dudes on the top of the bus in the parade with chaps and their butt cheeks hanging out, and the media is going to show that. And that's, I think, where a lot of people get the fear from. They see that image and they think it's all about sex and they are coming for my kids. And I think there was a protest, I don't know when it was, a couple years ago, and it might have been in Brooklyn, where they were chanting, "We're here, we're queer, we're coming for your children." and the media
Oh,
grabs
yeah.
that.
Queer people love making, I will say, queer people love
Kind of mock
making a
the
commentary on and like mocking what people say about us. Cause it's just like they're gonna say it regardless. So we might as well make it funny. But yeah, people love to twist that.
and just know people that there's always a different side. There's
Yeah.
monitor what your media you're consuming, because the media is going to sensationalize any side of whatever argument it may be and polarize it. Final thoughts as we land this plane, as my hero Mike Rowe from Dirty Job says. That's how he ends his podcast episodes. I thought that was kind of cool. We're landing this plane. So any final words?
That's funny. I think just love your kids. And I think
Weird concept.
weird
Mormons.
concept. I know.
Loving your children.
And just reminding yourself of the love that you have for your children, even when you're facing difficulty with something that they're experiencing. I think that's the most important thing that you can do.
Fine. Be that way. Just end it like that. Mic drop.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
And good to
and letting me share
get
my
this
voice.
all out. You have a good voice.
Thank
It's
you.
good to share. Good to talk about it.
Thank you.
Okay. Well, that's it.
That's it. Goodbye.
Love you.
Love you.
Thank you again for listening to The Parish the Thought Show. We know you have many podcast options and appreciate that you have chosen us. If you love what you hear, please give us a rating on whatever platform you find us. And don't forget to share, like, and subscribe. If you hate what you hear, only tell us. You're still here? Click on the next episode for more from The Parish the Thought Show.